I was reviewing our joint account statement on my banking app when the notification popped up. New transaction, $847.99 to Fantasy Live Premium. And my coffee mug slipped from my hand, shattering on our marble kitchen floor, the brown liquid spreading like the lies I was about to uncover. Because in that moment, staring at my phone screen at 7:23 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, I knew my marriage was over before I even scrolled down to see the full extent of what Michael had been hiding. My name is Megan, I'm 36, and I thought I had the perfect life as a senior financial analyst, married to Michael for 11 years, living in our beautiful suburban home with our 2 kids at private school. But that morning changed everything when I decided to check our finances early, something I rarely did because Michael always handled the boring money stuff, as he called it, even though I literally analyzed million-dollar portfolios for a living. The past few months had felt off, but I couldn't pinpoint why. Michael working late more often, being protective of his phone, those little changes you notice but dismiss because you trust your partner. And now here I was, seeing charge after charge to sites I'd never heard of. Sultry streams, exclusive temptations, VIP desires, each transaction ranging from $49.99 to $1,399. And when I totaled them up, my hands shaking as I switched to my laptop for a bigger screen, the number made me physically sick. $12,147 over just the past 4 months. I sat there in my silk pajamas, surrounded by our perfect life, the kitchen we'd just renovated, the family photos from our Bahamas vacation, his world's best dad mug still in the dishwasher, while discovering that my husband had spent more on cam girls than we'd saved for our daughter's college fund. And the worst part was how he'd hidden it, using our joint account like I was too stupid to notice, too trusting to check, too busy being the perfect wife to see what was happening right under my nose. Looking back, the signs had been everywhere, like breadcrumbs leading to this devastating discovery, and I kicked myself for being so blind, so trusting, so focused on maintaining our perfect suburban life while Michael was living a completely different existence online, one that cost us thousands of dollars and would ultimately cost him everything he claimed to value. It started small, the way these things always do. Him taking his phone to the bathroom, angling his laptop screen away when I walked by. Those client dinners that ran until midnight. And when I'd ask about our finances, he'd pat my hand condescendingly and say, "Don't worry about it, babe, I've got it handled," even though I was literally the one with the finance degree. But I let it slide because that's what good wives do, right? The credit card statement started showing odd charges months ago. Vague entertainment services, mysterious digital subscriptions, expensive premium access fees that made no sense. And when I questioned them, Michael had ready answers for everything. Business expenses he'd get reimbursed for, software subscriptions for his consulting work, premium LinkedIn features to network better. And I believed him because why wouldn't I believe my husband of 11 years, the father of my children, the man who still brought me flowers every Friday like clockwork? But then came the behavioral changes that money couldn't explain. The way he'd jump when notifications came through, how he suddenly needed privacy for work calls at odd hours, the new password on his laptop for security, he said. And most telling of all, our sex life dwindled to absolutely nothing while he stayed up late working in his office, the blue glow of his screen visible under the door until 3 a.m., sometimes even later, the soft clicking of his keyboard a soundtrack to my growing suspicions. I even mentioned it to my sister Laura during our weekly coffee dates, laughing it off as a midlife crisis, joking that at least he wasn't buying a motorcycle or dating his secretary, never imagining that what he was actually doing was somehow worse, creating an entire secret life funded by our joint savings, our children's future, our shared dreams, all spent on women who didn't even know his real name. Performers who called him Big Spender 469, or whatever username he'd chosen. While I lay alone in our king-sized bed wondering where my husband had gone, not knowing he'd never really left, just hidden himself behind a screen and a credit card, building a fantasy world that was bleeding our real one dry.
That Tuesday morning, when everything unraveled, started like any other, except our daughter Sophie had woken up with a fever. So I called in sick to stay home with her, and it was pure coincidence that I decided to do some financial planning while she napped, thinking I'd surprise Michael by organizing our investments. maybe even finding extra money for that vacation he'd been postponed, never imagining I was about to discover why we couldn't afford anything anymore, despite our comfortable income. I'd settled into his home office with my laptop, logging into our joint account to download statements for our tax preparer, when that first notification popped up, and then another and another, a cascade of charges that made my blood run cold. Hefty payments to Fantasy Live Premium were just the beginning, because as I scrolled through our transaction history, my professional analyst brain automatically categorizing and calculating, I found charge after charge to sites with names that left nothing to the imagination: Naughty Cam Paradise, Exclusive Desires VIP, Secret Pleasures Live. Some transactions as recent as last night when he'd claimed to be on a conference call with My hands trembled as I opened our savings account, the one we'd been building for Sophie and Ethan's college funds, only to find it nearly empty, drained by automatic transfers I'd never authorized. And when I checked our credit cards, the real horror revealed itself. Maxed out, every single one, with cash advances taken against them, all feeding into this digital addiction that had been happening right under my nose, while I trusted him completely. While I defended him to my mother, who'd said something seemed off, while I made excuses for his distance and exhaustion, the evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Transaction after transaction, painting a picture of a man who'd spent hours every day in these virtual rooms. And the timestamps told their own story. 2:47 a.m. when he said he couldn't sleep due to work stress. 1:15 p.m. during his lunch meetings. 11:30 p.m. while I put our kids to bed alone. And most heartbreaking of all, 7:23 p.m. on our anniversary when he texted that he was stuck in traffic, but the location services on our credit card app showed he'd been home, just locked in his office, paying an astronomical sum for something called a private alternate experience with someone named Destiny 2069. I sat there in his leather chair, surrounded by photos of our family, staring at numbers that made me physically ill. Thousands upon thousands in just 4 months. And as I dug deeper, exporting data like the analyst I was, the full scope emerged. The total amount he'd squandered over the past year was staggering. More than most people's annual salaries. Our children's futures converted into pixels and empty promises. And that's when I knew this wasn't just a betrayal. It was financial infidelity, deliberate deception, and I wasn't going to be the victim in this story anymore. Because $12,847 was just the tip of this devastating iceberg. The hardest part wasn't discovering the betrayal. It was pretending I hadn't, because that evening when Michael came home with takeout from my favorite restaurant, kissing my cheek and asking about Sophie's fever, I had to swallow my rage and smile. Had to accept his lies about the exhausting client meeting while knowing he'd spent his afternoon in a private chat room. Had to let him tuck our children into bed while I bit my tongue so hard it bled, all while my mind raced with plans for what would come next. I became a digital detective overnight, learning skills I never knew I needed. And every moment Michael left the house became an opportunity to gather evidence, starting with screenshots of every single transaction, which I methodically organized into folders labeled by month, by platform, by the astronomical amounts he'd spent, creating a financial trail so comprehensive that no lawyer could dispute it, no judge could ignore it, backing everything up to multiple cloud accounts he didn't know existed, emailing encrypted copies to an attorney friend who'd helped me understand my options while maintaining complete confidentiality. The investigation revealed layers of deception I hadn't imagined. He'd opened credit cards in both our names that I'd never seen, taken out a substantial personal loan claiming home improvements we never made, even cashed in investments meant for retirement to fund this addiction. And through the browser history he'd forgotten to clear, I discovered he'd been active on these sites for 3 years, not months. Meaning our entire marriage had been a performance while he lived this double life, spending our security on strangers who called him Daddy Bucks and Golden Boy, usernames that made me nauseous every time I documented them.
Maintaining normalcy became my Oscar-worthy performance, making his coffee with steady hands while screenshots printed in my hidden office printer, discussing weekend plans while calculating the exact amount of marital assets he'd stolen, maintaining our normal routine to avoid suspicion, though every interaction felt like a betrayal knowing where those hands had been, what they'd typed, who they'd paid to perform for him while I raised our children alone. And each day I grew stronger, angrier, more determined to ensure he'd face consequences for every single dollar, every single lie, every moment he'd chosen pixels over people. My sister Laura became my secret ally when I finally broke down and told her everything during one of our coffee dates. And she helped me open my own bank account at a different bank, change my direct deposit without alerting him, start building an escape fund while documenting every financial crime he'd committed, because this wasn't just about divorce anymore. This was about fraud, theft, breach of fiduciary duty, terms I learned from late-night research while he snored beside me, oblivious to the storm brewing in our perfect suburban home, unaware that his carefully constructed house of digital cards was about to collapse spectacularly, and I'd be the one holding the match. 3 weeks into my secret investigation, I made my first strategic move by scheduling a consultation with the city's most ruthless divorce attorney, Patricia Chen, who specialized in financial fraud cases. And when I laid out my evidence, the spreadsheets, the screenshots, the hidden accounts, she actually whistled low and said, "Your husband didn't just cheat. He committed financial infidelity on a scale that could land him in serious legal trouble." Words that strengthened my resolve as I signed the retainer agreement with money from my new secret account. The universe seemed to conspire in my favor when Michael announced a business trip to Chicago, giving me 3 full days to execute the next phase of my plan, which started with changing every password on our home security system, installing hidden cameras in his office for the children's safety. I'd tell him if asked, and most importantly, meeting with a forensic accountant who helped me trace every transaction, every hidden account, every financial betrayal that would ensure I'd get full custody and maximum support when the time came to strike. Almost getting caught happened more than once, like when Michael came home early while I was photographing documents in his office, forcing me to shove everything into a drawer and pretend I was looking for Sophie's immunization records, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it, or when he noticed the banking app on my phone and I had to quickly say I was checking our rewards points, all while screenshots of his camgirl transactions burned in my recently deleted folder. Evidence backed up in 3 different locations he'd never think to check. My covert operation expanded when I discovered something that changed everything. Reviewing our insurance policies, I found he'd quietly removed me as beneficiary on his substantial life insurance just 2 months ago, replacing me with his mother who lived across the country, a woman who hadn't visited our children in 2 years. And this revelation led me down a rabbit hole where I found he'd also been slowly transferring assets to accounts bearing only his name, preparing his own exit strategy while I'd been playing devoted wife, trusting fool, the woman who managed million-dollar portfolios at work, but somehow missed the theft happening in her own home. The preparation intensified as I coordinated with my attorney to file everything simultaneously: the divorce papers, the fraud charges, the restraining order to keep him from the house, the emergency custody filing, all while maintaining my performance at home, even planning his birthday dinner, ordering his favorite cake, acting excited about the surprise party he'd never see because D-Day was set for the morning after, when he'd wake up to find his world destroyed by the very technology he'd used to betray us. And I practiced my speech in the mirror each night after he fell asleep, perfecting the calm delivery of his destruction, counting down the days until justice would be served ice cold with a side of digital receipts he couldn't deny. The morning of Michael's birthday arrived with perfect irony, him sleeping peacefully beside me, completely unaware that in exactly 3 hours, his carefully constructed digital fantasy world would come crashing down, and I lay there watching him snore, thinking about all the nights I'd done the same thing while he was secretly online, draining our accounts 1 transaction at a time. But today would be different because today, I held all the cards, all the evidence, all the power he'd thought he had over me. At 6:47 a.m. while Michael showered, humming off-key like he didn't have a care in the world, I executed the plan with military precision. First, I moved our children's bags to my sister's car waiting outside, telling them we were surprising Daddy with a special breakfast. Then I returned to place a single manila envelope on his pillow, containing just one document, a printed screenshot of his most expensive transaction, the one from our anniversary, with a sticky note that simply read, "Check your email, birthday boy." Before walking out of the house I'd called home for 11 years, my hands steady, my conscience clear, my future finally my own again. By 7:15 a.m., as I sat in Patricia Chen's office with Laura holding my hand, Michael's phone started exploding with notifications, and I knew he'd opened the email I'd scheduled to send, the one with the subject line, "Happy birthday, here's your present," containing 47 pages of evidence. Every screenshot meticulously labeled, every transaction highlighted, every lie documented, along with copies of the divorce filing, the fraud charges, the restraining order, and my personal favorite, a spreadsheet showing exactly how much of our children's college funds he'd spent on Candy Kitty 95 and her friends, color-coded by month because I was still a financial analyst even in my revenge. The beauty of digital evidence is its undeniability, and watching through our doorbell camera app on my phone, I saw the exact moment Michael found the envelope, his face transforming from confusion to horror as he recognized the transaction, then the frantic scramble for his phone still dripping from his shower, and I could practically see his hands shaking as he opened email after email, each one revealing another layer of his deception reflected back at him. The months of overtime exposed as hours in private chat rooms, the client dinners revealed as premium subscriptions, the investment losses, shown to be deliberate theft from his own children. The text messages started pouring in by 7:23 a.m., his number already blocked but showing in my archived folder, a frantic progression from confusion to anger to desperation. "What is this?" Then, "We need to talk." Then, "This is illegal." Then, "Please, Megan, think of the kids." Then, "I can explain everything." Then, "You can't prove anything." Then, "I'll fight this." Then, finally, "You can't do this to me." And I almost laughed at that last one because I wasn't doing anything to him. He'd done it all to himself. I was just the messenger delivering the receipts he'd created, the evidence he'd generated with every click, every payment, every lie he'd typed while I slept upstairs. Patricia informed me that by 8 a.m., Michael had tried to access our joint accounts only to find them frozen by court order, his credit cards suspended pending investigation, his precious Camgirl subscriptions automatically canceled, and when he'd attempted to enter the house, he discovered the locks had been changed and a process server waiting with additional papers, while neighbors watched from their windows as the man who'd portrayed himself as the perfect husband and father stood on his own lawn in his birthday suit-adjacent bathrobe, locked out of the life he'd betrayed, holding legal documents that detailed every sordid dollar of his deception. And the best part was when Mrs. Henderson from next door loudly asked if everything was all right, forcing him to smile and lie one more time. Just locked myself out, while clutching papers that proved he was the architect of his own destruction. 6 months later, I can finally say those numbers without flinching. $12,847, the price of my freedom, the cost of discovering who I really was, beneath the roles of devoted wife and trusting fool. And while Michael now lives in a studio apartment, his wages garnished, his reputation destroyed, I've rebuilt everything he tried to steal from us. The divorce settlement was everything Patricia promised. Full custody, the house, proper child support, and most satisfying of all, court-ordered restitution for every stolen dollar, to be paid back with interest over the next 10 years. A monthly reminder of his choices delivered directly to the college funds he'd emptied. My career exploded once I stopped carrying the weight of his secrets. That promotion I'd been passed over for 3 times suddenly materialized when I could focus on work instead of wondering where my husband was, and my boss even commented on my renewed energy, not knowing it came from finally using my analytical skills to protect myself instead of ignoring obvious signs in my own life. The kids adjusted beautifully, probably because they finally had a present parent instead of 2 distracted ones, and when Sophie asked why Daddy lived somewhere else now, I simply told her that sometimes adults make choices that mean they can't live together anymore, keeping her innocence intact while ensuring she'd never experience the financial insecurity her father tried to create. But the real transformation was mine. I learned to trust my instincts again, to value my worth beyond being someone's wife, to show my children that strength sometimes means walking away, And when I finally created my own dating profile, I wrote simply, financial analyst, single mom, rebuilt from scratch and stronger for it, seeking someone who values honesty and keeping their credit cards in their own name. Because humor helps. Transparency is everything, and I'll never again ignore the notifications that try to tell me the truth.